In the heart of Silicon Valley, where billion-dollar dreams collide with harsh realities, an extraordinary encounter is about to unfold. When tech mogul Aria Lancaster's prized Ferrari breaks down in a forgotten alley, she believes she's facing just another inconvenience money can fix. She couldn't be more wrong. The man she's about to berate isn't your typical passerby. Reyes carries 30 years of mechanical genius in his weathered hands, hidden beneath the uniform of a warehouse worker who's spent decades in the shadows of America's promise. This isn't just another story about rich versus poor. This is about how a stalled engine becomes the unlikely catalyst that forces two worlds to collide, revealing that brilliance, dignity, and innovation often thrive in the most unexpected places. When corporate power meets street-smart ingenuity, the results will challenge everything both of them thought they knew about success, sacrifice, and what it truly means to build something that matters. But what happens when the very system that created their divide becomes the battleground for their unlikely partnership? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Fairmont, San Francisco's grand ballroom shimmered with the kind of opulence that made headlines and tax deductions in equal measure. Crystal chandeliers cast geometric shadows across tables where Silicon Valley's elite gathered for the annual Children's Future Foundation Gala, their laughter echoing off marble columns that had witnessed decades of similar performances. Aria Lancaster stood at the podium, her ice-white Armani suit catching the spotlight like armor. At 42, she possessed the kind of sharp beauty that commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors' angular cheekbones, platinum hair pulled into a severe chignon, and eyes the color of winter steel. Her scarlet Ferrari Fate Tributo waited in the valet lot like a sleek predator, its $280 price tag a mere footnote in her billion-dollar empire. Ladies and gentlemen, Aria's voice carried the practiced cadence of someone who delivered countless speeches. Tonight we celebrate not just our success, but our commitment to lifting up the next generation. She gestured toward the gleaming trophy beside her, a twisted glass sculpture that would join dozens of others in her Palo Alto mansion's trophy room. This Foundation Excellence Award represents more than recognition. It represents our shared responsibility to those less fortunate. The audience applauded on cue, their enthusiasm as choreographed as their charitable donations. Aria had built her fortune on pattern recognition software that revolutionized online advertising, though few remembered that the core algorithm came from a graduate student whose name had been quietly erased from the patents. Such details rarely surfaced at galas, where image mattered more than origin stories. 23 miles away, in a warehouse district where the American dream felt more like a distant rumor, Lucho Reyes punched out from his night shift at Consolidated Logistics. His weathered hands bore the calluses of honest workloading, sorting, and moving the goods that kept Silicon Valley's prosperity machine humming. At 55, Luis carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd learned that respect couldn't be bought or borrowed, only earned through consistency and character. The warehouse's fluorescent lights flickered against the pre-dawn darkness as Luis gathered his lunch pail and thermos. His supervisor, Danny Chen, waved from the loading dock. "See you tomorrow, Lucho. Drive safe." Luis nodded, his tired smile genuine, despite the exhaustion that settled into his bones like morning fog. He'd been working nights for 8 years, ever since his wife Maria's death had left him as the sole provider for their 2 children. The schedule allowed him to be home when 16-year-old Miguel returned from school and to help with Sophia's therapy sessions. The parking lot held a collection of vehicles that told working-class stories: pickup trucks with dented fenders, sedans with high mileage, and Luis's own 1,998 Honda Civic with 340 miles and a transmission that required the kind of gentle coaxing only long-term partners understood. He'd rebuilt that engine twice, each time with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a craftsman. As he drove through the empty streets, Luis reflected on the day ahead. Miguel had a calculus exam. The boy inherited his mother's mathematical mind and his father's mechanical intuition, a combination that could open doors Luis himself had never been able to walk through. Sophia, now 12, had made remarkable progress in her therapy sessions, though each breakthrough came with financial calculations that kept Luis awake during his few precious hours of sleep. The modest duplex in East San Jose told a different story than the Fairmont's ballroom. The chain-link fence needed repair. The small front yard showed patches of brown, despite Luis's careful tending, and the neighbor's dog had taken to barking at precisely 4 a.m. But inside, warmth radiated from family photographs, Miguel's honor roll certificates, and Sophia's artwork colorful drawings that captured her unique perspective on a world that often failed to understand her gifts. Luis found Miguel asleep at the kitchen table, textbooks spread around him like fallen leaves. The boy had grown 3 inches in the past year, his shoulders broadening toward manhood, while his eyes retained the gentle intelligence that reminded Luis painfully of Maria. A note in Miguel's careful handwriting read, "Sophia had a good day. Finished her puzzle and helped with dinner. She's asking about the car sounds again." Sophia's fascination with mechanical noises had emerged as part of her autism spectrum behaviors, but Luis recognized something deeper, an intuitive understanding of how things worked that mirrored his own childhood curiosity. Where others heard random sounds, Sophia detected patterns, rhythms, and irregularities that often escaped trained mechanics. In the living room, Sophia slept on the couch, her therapy journal clutched against her chest. Luis gently extracted the notebook, its pages filled with breakthrough moments documented by her therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez. The entries revealed a brilliant mind trapped behind communication barriers, desperately seeking connection with a world that moved too fast and spoke too loudly. The therapy sessions cost $180 each, twice weekly, with insurance covering barely half. Luis had calculated that Sophia would need at least 2 more years of intensive treatment to reach the independence levels Dr. Martinez believed possible. The math was simple and brutal. $18,720 per year for therapy, plus Miguel's college preparations, plus basic survival expenses, divided by his $42,000 annual salary. But Luis possessed something that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets or gala speeches, an intimate knowledge of how things worked at their most fundamental level. His garage workshop, carved from half of the duplex's single-car space, contained the accumulated tools and wisdom of a lifetime spent understanding machines. The workshop walls displayed photographs from Luis's previous life images of Formula One cars, endurance racing teams, and victory celebrations where he stood slightly apart from the champagne-soaked drivers. In those days, he'd been known as El Fantasma, the Ghost, for his ability to diagnose and fix problems that stumped teams of engineers. His undocumented status had kept him in the shadows, his genius attributed to others who could legally claim credit. Maria had understood. She'd married him knowing that his talents would never receive their due recognition, that his innovations would be claimed by others, that his American dream would always carry an asterisk. But she'd also seen the pride he took in work well done, regardless of who received the accolades. The racing world had been brutal to undocumented workers, even those with exceptional abilities. Luis had watched lesser mechanics receive promotions and recognition, while he remained invisible, his suggestions implemented without attribution. The final insult came when a safety modification he'd designed, a simple but effective roll cage improvement, was patented by the team's chief engineer and sold to manufacturers worldwide. That betrayal had driven Luis away from racing, but it hadn't diminished his mechanical genius. He'd simply redirected it towards survival, using his skills to keep his family's aging vehicles running, to help neighbors with repairs they couldn't afford, and to develop solutions to problems that the wealthy never had to contemplate. In a coffee-stained notebook, Luis had sketched designs for a retrofit device that could prevent the rollover accidents that claimed dozens of truck drivers each year. The system was elegant in its simplicity, a combination of sensors and hydraulics that could detect instability and automatically adjust the vehicle's center of gravity. The components would cost less than $300 to manufacture, but the potential to save lives was immeasurable. He'd tried to interest manufacturers in the device, but his presentations lacked the corporate polish that opened doors in Silicon Valley. Patent lawyers cost more than he earned in months, and the venture capital world might as well have existed on another planet. His revolutionary idea remained trapped in a notebook, as invisible as he'd been in the racing world. Miguel stirred as Luis closed the notebook, his son's eyes opening with the startled awareness of someone bearing too much responsibility too young. "Dad, everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Mijo. Go to bed properly. I'll handle breakfast." As Miguel shuffled toward his bedroom, Luis reflected on the irony that surrounded them. 23 miles away, Aria Lancaster received awards for philanthropy that touched thousands of lives in abstract ways, while Luis's concrete innovation, something that could save actual lives, remained invisible to the very system that claimed to value innovation above all else. The morning news played softly on their old television, its anchor describing the previous night's gala as Silicon Valley's commitment to social responsibility. Luis watched footage of Aria accepting her award. Her speech about lifting up the next generation, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about lifting herself up first. He turned off the television and began preparing breakfast, his hands moving with the same precision he brought to mechanical problems. Soon, Sofia would wake up and fill the house with her unique perspective on the world, and Miguel would review his calculus notes one more time before school. The day would unfold with its mixture of small victories and persistent challenges, just like every day in a life where dignity and dreams coexisted with financial reality. Neither Luis nor Aria could have imagined that their worlds would collide in a few short hours, that a stalled engine would become the catalyst for a partnership that would challenge everything they thought they knew about success, innovation, and what it truly meant to make a difference in the world. The Foundation Award sat in Aria's trophy room, catching the morning light like a promise kept. But sometimes the most meaningful awards can't be displayed on shelves. They're measured in lives changed, barriers crossed, and the recognition that genius and dignity often thrive in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The Ferrari's engine coughed like an old man clearing his throat, then died with a finality that made Aria's blood pressure spike. She'd been driving through the Tenderloin Districtor route her GPS had calculated as the fastest way home from the gala, though she'd never ventured into this part of the city before. The irony wasn't lost on her, accepting an award for helping disadvantaged communities while actively avoiding them. Steam rose from beneath the Ferrari's hood, and the acrid smell of overheated metal filled the air. Aria sat frozen in the driver's seat, her manicured fingers gripping the steering wheel as if holding tighter might somehow resurrect the 280 zero machine. Around her, the alley seemed to close in graffiti-covered walls, overflowing dumpsters, and the kind of urban decay that existed in the spaces between Silicon Valley's gleaming towers. Her phone showed no signal, which felt impossible until she remembered that her carrier's coverage maps had curious gaps in neighborhoods where the residents couldn't afford premium service plans. The nearest streetlight flickered sporadically, casting intermittent shadows that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Luis emerged from the warehouse loading dock, his shift finally over after 10 hours of moving boxes that contained the material dreams of people who would never know his name. His body ached with the familiar soreness of middle-age meeting manual labor, but his mind had already shifted to the morning routine check on Sofia, help Miguel with breakfast, maybe catch a few hours of sleep before the afternoon therapy session. The sound of expensive automotive distress reached his ears before he saw the Ferrari. Luis had heard that particular combination of sounds before a cooling system failure, probably a burst radiator hose, complicated by what sounded like a failing water pump. His steps quickened, not from curiosity, but from the instinct that had made him legendary in racing circles. When something mechanical needed help, you helped. "Excuse me," Luis called out, approaching the driver's side window. "You having trouble with your car?" Aria's head snapped toward him, her eyes taking in his warehouse uniform, work boots, and the general appearance of someone who belonged in this neighborhood. Her mind made the instant calculations that privilege teaches this man represented either a threat or an inconvenience, possibly both. "Stay away from my car," she said through the partially open window, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I don't need your help." Luis paused, recognizing the fear and disdain in her tone. He'd encountered it before, the assumption that his appearance and ethnicity made him dangerous, that his desire to help was actually a scheme to take advantage. But the Ferrari's distress signals were becoming more urgent, and his mechanical instincts overrode his personal feelings. "Lady, I'm just trying to help. Your radiator's about to—" "I said stay away." Aria's voice rose to near hysteria. "I know what you're doing. You probably sabotaged my car so you could rob me. Well, it won't work. I'm calling the police." She held up her phone, its screen showing the same no service message that had been taunting her for the past 10 minutes. Luis noticed the futile gesture and felt a combination of pity and irritation. Here was someone so insulated by wealth that she couldn't recognize genuine assistance when it was offered. "Look, I don't want your money," Luis said, his voice remaining calm despite the insult. "I'm just a mechanic trying to help another human being. But if you'd rather sit here until your engine block cracks, that's your choice." He turned to walk away, but the Ferrari's cooling system chose that moment to surrender completely. A geyser of steam erupted from beneath the hood, followed by the metallic screech of an engine seizing from overheating. The sound made Luis wince. It was like hearing a musical instrument being destroyed. Aria watched in horror as her prized possession transformed into an expensive paperweight. The steam cloud engulfed the car, and she could hear the ticking sounds of metal contracting as the engine temperature dropped. Her transportation, her status symbol, her carefully crafted image, all of it, threatened by a mechanical failure in the worst possible location. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you really fix it?" Luis stopped and turned back, studying her face through the steam-fogged window. He saw desperation there, the kind that came from realizing that money couldn't solve every problem. More importantly, he saw the fear of someone who'd never been vulnerable before, who'd never had to depend on the kindness of strangers. "I can try," he said simply, "but I'll need to look under the hood." Aria hesitated, then pressed the hood release. The Ferrari's front end lifted to reveal the kind of engineering precision that made Luis's heart race despite his circumstances. This wasn't just a car, it was a mechanical symphony composed of Italian craftsmanship and decades of automotive evolution. The diagnosis was immediately clear. A burst radiator hose had caused a cascade failure that killed the water pump and overheated the engine. In a normal repair shop, this would require hours of work and hundreds of dollars in parts. But Luis wasn't working in a normal repair shop, and he'd spent a lifetime learning to make miracles from minimal resources. "I need some tools," he said, walking back to his Honda Civic. From the trunk, he retrieved a small toolbox that had followed him from the racing circuit. Nothing fancy, just the essential implements that a good mechanic learns to trust. But the real surprise came when he returned to the Ferrari and pulled something from his pocket. Maria's hairpin. It was a simple thing, crafted from spring steel and worn smooth by years of use. She'd worn it every day during their marriage, and Luis had carried it since her death, a talisman that connected him to the woman who'd believed in his gifts, even when the world refused to acknowledge them. "What are you doing?" Aria asked, watching as Luis bent the hairpin into a specific shape. "Making a temporary bypass," he replied, his hands moving with surgical precision. "Your radiator hose burst, but the engine's still good. I can reroute the coolant flow using this and a few other adjustments." What followed was a masterclass in mechanical improvisation. Luis used the hairpin to create a connector that shouldn't have worked but did, employed a piece of electrical tape as a gasket, and performed a series of adjustments that transformed the Ferrari's cooling system from a disaster into a functional, if temporary, solution. The most remarkable part wasn't the repair itself, it was watching Luis work. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who understood machines at their most fundamental level. He anticipated problems before they developed, compensated for missing parts with creative alternatives, and treated the expensive engine with the same care he'd show a family heirloom. "Try starting it now," he said, stepping back from the Ferrari. Aria turned the key, expecting nothing. Instead, the engine turned over with a smooth purr that sounded almost grateful. The temperature gauge showed normal readings, and the various warning lights had disappeared. Her 280 car was running again, saved by a warehouse worker with a toolbox and his late wife's hairpin. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications that neither wanted to acknowledge. Aria had spent her entire career believing that problems required expensive solutions, that innovation came from well-funded research labs, that the world's best minds worked in Silicon Valley's glass towers. Luis had just shattered those assumptions using nothing but skill, creativity, and a piece of steel jewelry. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, reaching for her purse. "Nothing," Luis replied, closing her hood with gentle precision. "Just helping a neighbor." But Aria's mind was already racing beyond the immediate crisis. She'd built her fortune on recognizing patterns, on seeing opportunities that others missed. The man standing before her possessed a level of mechanical genius that her companies paid consultants millions to approximate. More importantly, he demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking that could revolutionize entire industries. "Wait," she said as Luis began walking toward his Honda. "You said you're a mechanic. Where do you work?" Luis paused, considering his response. The truth was complicated. He worked in a warehouse, not a garage, and his mechanical skills were largely self-taught and honed through necessity rather than formal training. But something in Aria's voice suggested genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. "I work nights at Consolidated Logistics," he said. "But I used to work on race cars, long time ago." "Race cars?" Aria's interest sharpened. "What kind of racing?" "Formula One, endurance racing, some NASCAR." Luis's voice carried the weight of memories both proud and painful, back when I could find work in the field. The implications hung in the air like the steam that had risen from the Ferrari's engine. Here was a man whose skills had been tested at the highest levels of motorsport, who'd worked on machines that pushed the boundaries of engineering and physics. Yet he was spending his nights loading boxes in a warehouse, his genius as invisible as he'd been in the racing world. "I have a proposition," Aria said, her business instincts overriding her earlier fear and prejudice. "I'd like to hear more about your experience. Maybe we could discuss some consulting opportunities." Luis studied her face, searching for the condescension he'd encountered so often before. Instead, he saw something that surprised him: genuine respect, the kind that came from recognizing excellence, regardless of its packaging. "I'm not looking for charity," he said carefully. "This isn't charity," Aria replied. "This is business. What you just did, solving a complex problem with minimal resources, that's exactly the kind of innovation my companies need. I'd like to learn more about how you think, how you approach problems." The conversation that followed was brief but significant. Luis explained his background, his current situation, and his dreams for innovations that could make a real difference. Aria listened with the intensity of someone who'd built an empire on identifying undervalued assets. By the time they parted ways, something had shifted in both their worlds. Luis drove home as the sun began to rise, Maria's hairpin once again in his pocket. He'd helped a stranger and potentially opened a door to opportunities he'd stopped imagining years ago. The warehouse job would end in a few hours, but something told him that his real work was just beginning. Aria drove toward her Palo Alto mansion, her Ferrari purring smoothly, thanks to a repair that shouldn't have been possible. She'd set out for a charity gala and returned with something more valuable than any award: recognition that innovation and genius often thrived in the most unexpected places. waiting for someone willing to look beyond surface appearances. The hairpin had done more than fix a carrot, had connected two worlds that had never been meant to meet, setting in motion a partnership that would challenge everything both of them thought they knew about success, dignity, and the true meaning of making a difference. The Lancaster Technologies building rose 32 stories above downtown San Francisco, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of innovation. Inside the 42nd floor conference room, Louise felt as out of place as a socket wrench in a jewelry box. The polished mahogany table, ergonomic chairs, and panoramic city views represented a world he'd only glimpsed from the outside. Aria had called him 3 days after the Ferrari incident, her voice carrying the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to making decisions quickly. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she'd said. "I'd like you to present your retrofit idea to my engineering team. Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. Now, surrounded by men and women in expensive suits, Luis unpacked his materials with the same careful precision he brought to mechanical work. The safety retrofit prototype sat in a cardboard boxer collection of sensors, hydraulic components, and electronic circuits that looked primitive compared to the sleek presentations his audience was accustomed to. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aria began, her tone professional but warmer than Luis had expected, "I'd like you to meet Luis Reyes. He's going to share an innovation that could save thousands of lives annually." Dr. Marcus Webb, Lancaster Technologies' chief engineer, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward with the skeptical expression of someone who'd seen countless garage inventors pitch miracle solutions. "Mr. Reyes, I understand you have a background in automotive mechanics." "Race car mechanics," Luis corrected, his voice steady despite the intimidating environment. "Formula One, endurance racing, NASCAR. I've worked on vehicles that push the absolute limits of physics and engineering." "But no formal engineering degree?" Webb's question carried the subtle dismissal that Luis had encountered throughout his career. "No formal degree," Luis admitted, "but 30 years of hands-on experience with machines that can't afford to fail. When a car's traveling 200 miles per hour and a driver's life depends on every component working perfectly, you learn to understand systems at a level that can't be taught in classrooms." He opened the cardboard box and carefully lifted out the prototype. The device was elegant in its simplicity, a network of sensors connected to a control unit that monitored vehicle stability in real time. When the system detected conditions that could lead to rollover accidents, it would automatically adjust the truck's suspension and braking to maintain control. "This is designed specifically for commercial trucking," Luis explained, his confidence growing as he entered his area of expertise. "Long-haul trucks carry shifting loads, face varying weather conditions, and operate on highways where a single mistake can be catastrophic. Current stability systems are expensive, complex, and often fail when drivers need them most." Sarah Chen, the company's lead software engineer, examined the device with genuine interest. "The sensor array is fascinating. How do you achieve this level of precision with such basic components?" Luis's eyes lit up as he began explaining the technical details. "The key is understanding how vehicles actually behave in crisis situations. Most stability systems react to problems after they develop. This system predicts instability before it becomes dangerous." He pulled out a laptop computer that had seen better days and connected it to the conference room's display system. The screen filled with data charts, sensor readings, and video footage of the prototype in action. Luis had spent months testing the system on his own vehicle, documenting its performance in conditions that would challenge any stability system. "Here's footage from mountain road testing," Luis said, advancing to a video that showed his Honda Civic navigating treacherous curves. "The system detects when the vehicle's approaching its stability limits and makes micro-adjustments to suspension and braking that keep it in control." The room fell silent as they watched the demonstration. Luis's system performed flawlessly, preventing what would have been several serious accidents. More importantly, it did so using components that cost a fraction of existing stability systems. The manufacturing cost is under $300 per unit. Luis continued, installation takes less than 4 hours and doesn't require specialized tools. We're talking about a system that could be standard equipment on every commercial truck in America. Dr. Webb leaned back in his chair, his skepticism warring with grudging respect. The concept is sound, but the implementation seems too simple. How do you account for the complex variables that affect vehicle dynamics? Luis smiled, recognizing the challenge. That's exactly the right question. Complex systems fail because they try to account for every possible variable. This system succeeds because it focuses on the fundamental physics of vehicle stability. When you understand how forces actually work, you can predict behavior with remarkable accuracy. He spent the next 20 minutes walking through the technical specifications, answering questions that revealed both the depth of his knowledge and the limitations of his presentation skills. Luis spoke the language of mechanics and physics fluently, but he lacked the corporate vocabulary that opened doors in Silicon Valley boardrooms. Jennifer Walsh, the company's marketing director, raised her hand. "Mr. Reyes, this is impressive technology, but how do we know there's a market for it? Have you done any market research?" Luis pulled out a folder filled with newspaper clippings, accident reports, and insurance statistics. 18,000 people die in truck accidents every year in the United States. 40% of those deaths involve rollover accidents that this system could prevent. The insurance industry pays out billions in claims that could be avoided. But market research involves more than accident statistics, Walsh persisted. We need to understand consumer behavior, purchasing patterns, regulatory requirements. The trucking industry will buy anything that keeps drivers alive and reduces insurance costs, Luis interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. I've talked to drivers, fleet managers, and insurance agents. They all say the same thing: they need affordable safety technology that actually works. The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. Luis had identified a genuine need and developed a practical solution, but he'd done so outside the traditional channels of corporate research and development. His prototype represented the kind of grassroots innovation that large companies often miss: solutions born from necessity rather than market analysis. Aria watched the exchange with growing fascination. She'd built her career on recognizing patterns, on seeing opportunities that others missed. The man sitting across from her represented something rare in Silicon Valley: genuine innovation driven by human need rather than profit potential. What would you need to bring this to market? She asked. Luis had prepared for this question, though his answer revealed the gap between his technical brilliance and business experience. Patents, manufacturing partnerships, regulatory approval, testing facilities, things that cost more money than I'll ever see. But if those obstacles were removed, Aria pressed, how quickly could this system be in production? 6 months for regulatory approval, assuming the testing goes well. Another 6 months to establish manufacturing partnerships. We could have units rolling off assembly lines within a year. The room erupted in discussion as Aria's team began calculating market potential, development costs, and implementation timelines. Luis watched the corporate machinery engage with his invention, feeling both excited and apprehensive about surrendering control of his creation. Dr. Webb raised his hand for attention. Mr. Reyes, this is interesting work, but it needs significant refinement before it's ready for commercial development. We'd need to rebuild the entire system using industrial-grade components. The components I used are industrial-grade, Luis replied. They're just not expensive. Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones. But our liability insurance requires certified components with documented performance histories, Webb continued. We can't bring a product to market using parts from automotive junkyards. Luis felt the familiar frustration that had plagued his entire career. His system worked, it was affordable, and it could save lives. But the corporate world demanded documentation, certification, and complexity that often had little relationship to actual performance. If we're going to do this, Aria said, sensing the tension, we need to find a way to preserve the system's elegance, while meeting our regulatory requirements. Luis, would you be willing to work with our engineering team to develop a production-ready version? The question hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds. Luis had spent decades watching his innovations be claimed by others, his contributions erased by corporate hierarchies that couldn't acknowledge genius without credentials. But Aria was offering something different, a partnership that could finally bring his work to the people who needed it. "I'd be honored," he said simply. The meeting concluded with handshakes, business cards, and the promise of follow-up discussions. As the conference room emptied, Luis packed his prototype with the same care he'd shown in unpacking it. The cardboard box might have looked primitive compared to the polished environment, but it contained something more valuable than any corporate presentation: a solution born from understanding, necessity, and the desire to make a difference. Aria lingered as Luis prepared to leave. "That was impressive," she said. "Your system could revolutionize commercial vehicle safety." "It's not about revolutionizing anything," Luis replied. "It's about keeping drivers alive so they can go home to their families. That's all it's ever been about." As he walked toward the elevator, Luis reflected on the morning's events. He'd entered the corporate world and survived. His invention had been taken seriously, and he'd found an ally in someone who understood both innovation and implementation. The retrofit system was one step closer to reality, but more importantly, he'd proven that solutions could come from unexpected places. The elevator doors closed on a world that had always seemed beyond his reach, but Luis was beginning to understand that sometimes the most important bridges were built not with credentials or connections, but with competence, persistence, and the willingness to believe that everyone deserves to make it home safely. The GPS in Aria's Tesla led her through neighborhoods that might as well have existed on another planet. East San Jose stretched before her like a revelation of the city's hidden geography: chain-link fences, modest houses with bars on the windows, and corner stores advertising services in Spanish. This was the San Francisco Bay Area that never appeared in tech industry promotional materials. Luis had given her his address reluctantly, accepting her request to visit his home only after she'd explained that understanding his invention meant understanding the world that had shaped it. "You want to see where innovation really happens," he'd said with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "But don't expect anything fancy." The duplex at 1247 Maple Street told its story in details that corporate reports couldn't capture. The small front yard had been transformed into a carefully tended garden where tomatoes grew alongside roses, where function and beauty coexisted in the space between necessity and hope. Luis emerged from the house as her Tesla pulled into the driveway, his expression carrying the nervous energy of someone sharing his most private world. "Welcome to the real Silicon Valley," he said, gesturing toward the neighborhood with gentle irony, "where the people who make the technology work actually live." Sophia appeared in the doorway, her dark hair framing curious eyes that seemed to take in everything simultaneously. At 12, she possessed the kind of focused intensity that made some adults uncomfortable, but Aria recognized something familiar in the girl's expression, the look of someone whose mind operated on frequencies that others couldn't always access. "Sophia, this is Ms. Lancaster," Luis said, his voice carrying the gentle patience of a father who'd learned to navigate his daughter's unique perspective. "She's here to talk about the car project." Sophia nodded but didn't speak, her attention focused on Aria's Tesla with the same intensity she'd once devoted to Luis's mechanical work. Her therapy journal clutched against her chest. She moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to find order in a chaotic world. "She's fascinated by engine sounds," Luis explained as they walked toward the house. "It started when she was little. She could identify different vehicles by their mechanical signatures. Most people hear noise, but Sophia hears patterns, rhythms, systems working together." The interior of the duplex revealed a family that had learned to make much from little. The living room furniture had been chosen for durability rather than style, but photographs covered every surface: images of Luis and Maria on their wedding day, Miguel's academic achievements, Sophia's artwork. and family moments that spoke of love transcending circumstances. Miguel looked up from his calculus homework as they entered, his expression mixing teenage self-consciousness with genuine curiosity about his father's new business associate. At 16, he'd inherited his mother's mathematical mind and his father's mechanical intuition, though his dreams extended far beyond the garage workshop. Miguel's been accepted to UC Berkeley's engineering program, Luis said, pride evident in his voice. Full scholarship, based on his academic performance and a robotics project he built using recycled electronics. That's impressive, Aria said, meaning it. What kind of robotics project? Miguel's shyness evaporated as he began explaining his creation, an automated system that could sort and identify electronic components from discarded devices. I noticed that repair shops throw away tons of functional parts because they don't have time to test and categorize them. My system can identify usable components and create an inventory database. Aria listened with growing fascination. The boy had identified a real problem and developed a sophisticated solution using resources that most Silicon Valley startups would consider laughably inadequate. His robot wasn't sleek or polished, but it worked a theme that seemed to run through the Reyes family's approach to innovation. The parts came from the electronics recycling center where I volunteer. Miguel continued. They were going to throw away boxes of components that just needed cleaning and testing. I figured out how to automate the process using machine learning algorithms I found online. Miguel taught himself programming, Luis added. Spent 2 summers learning different coding languages so he could build the control systems. The boy has his mother's gift for mathematics and pattern recognition. Sophia approached slowly, her therapy journal still clutched against her chest. She studied Aria with the intense focus that had initially made adults uncomfortable, but her father had taught her to trust her instincts about people. She wants to show you something, Luis said, recognizing his daughter's body language. Sophia, would you like to share your journal with Miss Lancaster? The girl nodded and carefully opened the notebook. The pages revealed a mind that processed the world in ways that others couldn't easily understand, but also with a clarity that was breathtaking. Sophia's entries documented her daily experiences through drawings, observations, and insights that revealed profound intelligence trapped behind communication barriers. One page showed detailed sketches of car engines, each drawing labeled with technical terms that most adults wouldn't recognize. Another contained mathematical equations that related engine performance to fuel efficiency, calculations that would have impressed Luis's former racing colleagues. She understands mechanical systems intuitively, Luis explained. Sometimes she notices problems before I do. Last month, she heard something wrong with our neighbor's car and kept pointing at it until I went over to investigate. The water pump was failing, but so gradually that the owner hadn't noticed. Aria studied the journal with growing amazement. Sophia's observations revealed a mind that could perceive patterns and relationships that escaped formal analysis. Her drawings showed mechanical systems not as static objects, but as dynamic relationships, living systems that breathed and responded to their environment. The therapy sessions are helping her communicate these insights, Luis continued. Dr. Martinez says Sophia has a form of autism that makes social interaction challenging, but also gives her extraordinary analytical abilities. She processes information differently than most people, but often more accurately. The financial reality behind Sophia's progress was evident in the careful way Luis discussed the therapy sessions. Each breakthrough came with a cost that he calculated in overtime hours, in sacrifices that the family made to invest in their daughter's future. The insurance covers some of it, Luis said, but not nearly enough. We're talking about $18,000 a year for the intensive treatment she needs. That's almost half my annual salary. Aria felt a familiar discomfort as she realized the gap between her charitable donations and the actual costs of helping real people. The Lancaster Foundation had contributed millions to autism research, but those donations had never translated into direct assistance for families like the Reyes, who were struggling to afford basic treatment. "What does Dr. Martinez say about Sophia's long-term prospects?" she asked. With continued therapy, she could reach a level of independence that would allow her to live on her own, maybe even attend college. Luis replied, "Sophia has the intellectual capacity, she just needs help, learning to navigate social situations and communicate her ideas." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Luis's Honda Civic pulling into the driveway. The engine's familiar rhythm filled the house, and Sophia's face lit up with recognition. She moved to the window and began making soft sounds that seemed to echo the car's mechanical patterns. "She's matching the engine's rhythm," Luis explained. "It's one of her ways of connecting with the mechanical world. She can hear things in that engine that I sometimes miss." Miguel closed his calculus book and joined them at the window. "Dad, Mrs. Chen from next door wants to know if you can look at her car tomorrow. She says it's making a noise that sounds like the washing machine when it's broken." Luis smiled at his son's translation. "Tell her I'll take a look after I get home from work. Probably just a belt tension issue." The casual exchange revealed the extent to which Luis's mechanical expertise had made him a neighborhood resource. Despite working night shifts and caring for his family, he somehow found time to help others with automotive problems they couldn't afford to fix professionally. "You do this often?" Aria asked. "Help neighbors with car repairs?" "When I can," Luis replied. "Most people around here are working multiple jobs just to survive. A car repair that costs $500 at a shop might represent a month's groceries. If I can fix it for the cost of parts and maybe a home-cooked meal, everybody wins." As the afternoon progressed, Aria began to understand that she wasn't just visiting a home, she was witnessing a different model of innovation, one based on community, necessity, and the kind of practical genius that solved real problems with available resources. The garage workshop revealed the full scope of Luis's capabilities. Tools that had followed him from the racing circuit hung alongside improvised devices he'd created for specific challenges. A workbench that had been built from salvaged materials displayed the kind of organization that only came from someone who understood that every tool had a purpose and every minute mattered. "This is where the retrofit system was born," Luis said, gesturing toward a corner where prototypes in various stages of development occupied a folding table. "I spent 2 years testing different sensor configurations, trying to find the combination that would provide reliable data without breaking the bank." The evolution of his invention was documented in notebooks filled with sketches, calculations, and test results. Each iteration had been an improvement on the last, guided by principles that Luis had learned from decades of making things work with whatever resources were available. "The breakthrough came when I realized I was overcomplicating the problem," Luis explained. "I was trying to create a system that could handle every possible scenario, but that made it expensive and fragile. The solution was to focus on the fundamental physics of vehicle stability and build around that." Sophia approached the workbench and began examining the prototype with the same intensity she'd shown the therapy journal. Her fingers traced the connections between components, and she made soft sounds that seemed to indicate approval. "She's been part of the development process," Luis said. "Sophia can hear when something's not working right, even before the instruments show a problem. She's like a human diagnostic tool." As the visit concluded, Aria found herself profoundly moved by what she'd witnessed. The Reyes family had transformed their circumstances through intelligence, hard work, and mutual support. But they'd also revealed the limitations of a system that kept genius hidden behind barriers of class, documentation, and access to resources. "Thank you for showing me this," she said as they stood in the driveway. "I understand now why your invention works. It comes from the same place as everything else in your life. You solve problems because you have to, and you do it with whatever tools are available." Luis nodded, recognizing that something had shifted in their relationship. Innovation isn't about having the best equipment or the biggest budget. It's about understanding problems deeply enough to find solutions that actually work. As Aria drove back toward her Palo Alto mansion, she reflected on the afternoon's revelations. The Reyes family lived 23 miles from her home, but they might as well have existed in a different universe. Yet they developed innovations that could change industries, demonstrated resilience that put her corporate challenges in perspective, and shown her what it meant to build something meaningful from whatever resources were available. The therapy journal sat on her passenger seat. Sophia had insisted she borrow it, apparently trusting that Aria would understand its importance. The notebook represented more than a record of progress. It was evidence of potential waiting to be unlocked, of genius that transcended conventional definitions of intelligence. For the first time in years, Aria felt the stirring of something that had been missing from her philanthropy, recognition that helping people meant more than writing checks or attending galas. Real change required understanding, partnership, and the humility to learn from those who'd been solving problems long before she'd noticed they existed. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official seal and government letterhead cutting through the stack of bills and advertisements like a blade. Luis recognized the Immigration and Customs Enforcement logo before he read the contents, his hands trembling as he opened the document that had haunted his nightmares for 23 years. Notice to appear dominated the page in bold letters, followed by legal language that transformed his worst fears into bureaucratic reality. Luis Eduardo Reyes was ordered to appear before an immigration judge within 30 days to show cause why he should not be removed from the United States. The deportation notice represented the collapse of everything he'd built, the destruction of his children's future, and the end of dreams that had sustained him through decades of invisibility. Miguel was at school, Sophia was at therapy, and the house felt suffocatingly quiet as Luis read the document 3 times, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into a different meaning. But the legal terminology was unambiguous. Someone had reported his status to immigration authorities, and the machinery of deportation had begun grinding toward its inevitable conclusion. His phone buzzed with a text from Aria. Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Need to discuss production timeline. The message represented a different world, one where his biggest concern should have been manufacturing partnerships and market projections. Instead, he was calculating how much time he had before everything he'd worked for was torn away. Luis folded the notice carefully and placed it in his wallet, next to the photograph of Maria that he'd carried since her death. She'd warned him that this day might come, that living in the shadows always carried the risk of eventual exposure. But they'd chosen to build a life anyway, to raise their children as Americans, to contribute to a society that could never fully acknowledge their existence. The irony wasn't lost on him as he faced deportation. His invention was closer to production than ever before. Aria's engineering team had spent 2 weeks refining the retrofit system, and preliminary tests showed results that exceeded even Luis's expectations. The device that could save thousands of lives might never reach the market because its creator was about to be exiled from the country that needed it most. At Lancaster Technologies, the atmosphere in the engineering department crackled with the kind of excitement that came from solving problems that mattered. Dr. Marcus Webb, despite his initial skepticism, had become Luis's strongest advocate after seeing the retrofit system's performance data. The preliminary testing results are extraordinary, Webb announced to the assembled team. Luis's system prevented rollover incidents in 97% of our simulation scenarios. That's better than any commercial stability system currently on the market. Sarah Chen pulled up the test data on the conference room's display. The response time is incredible. The system detects instability and makes corrections in less than 50 milliseconds. Most drivers wouldn't even realize the system had activated. But the enthusiasm was tempered by corporate realities that Luis was only beginning to understand. Richard Sterling, Lancaster Technologies' senior vice president and a board member with 30 years of Silicon Valley experience, had been conspicuously absent from the project meetings. His opposition to the retrofit system had been subtle but persistent, expressed through budget concerns and regulatory objections that seemed designed to slow progress rather than solve problems. We need to discuss the liability implications. Sterling had said during the previous week's board meeting, if this system fails and someone gets hurt, Lancaster Technologies could face lawsuits that dwarf our insurance coverage. Aria had pushed back against Sterling's concerns, but she recognized the political dynamics at play. Sterling represented the old guard of Silicon Valley venture capital, a world where innovation was secondary to profit margins and risk management. The retrofit system threatened that paradigm by solving problems too directly, too affordably, and with too much potential for disruption. Richard's been asking questions about Luis's background. Jennifer Walsh confided to Aria after the morning meeting. He wants to know about work history, education credentials, immigration status. It feels like he's building a case against the project. The warning sent a chill through Aria's chest. She'd assumed that Luis's genius would be self-evident, that corporate politics wouldn't interfere with obviously beneficial innovation. But Sterling's investigation suggested a different agenda, one that viewed Luis not as an asset but as a threat to established hierarchies. Luis arrived at the office that afternoon carrying the weight of the deportation notice and the knowledge that his time was running out. The engineering team greeted him with their usual enthusiasm, but he found it difficult to focus on technical discussions when his future remained so uncertain. "Luis, we need to talk about patent applications," Webb said, spreading blueprints across the conference table. "The system's ready for commercial development, but we need to establish intellectual property protection before we can approach manufacturers." The patent process represented another layer of complexity that Luis hadn't anticipated. His invention would need to be documented, filed, and defended through legal channels that required resources he didn't possess. More importantly, the patent application would make his name part of the public record, potentially exposing him to immigration authorities who were already searching for reasons to deport him. "How long does the patent process take?" Luis asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 18 months to 2 years for full approval," Webb replied. "But we can file for provisional patents that would protect the core concepts while we develop the commercial version." Luis nodded, but his mind was calculating different timelines. The deportation hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away, and his chances of remaining in the country were slim without legal representation he couldn't afford. The patent that would protect his invention might outlive his ability to remain in America. The afternoon session focused on manufacturing partnerships, and Luis found himself impressed by the scope of Aria's corporate connections. Lancaster Technologies had relationships with automotive suppliers, electronics manufacturers, and distribution networks that could bring the retrofit system to market within months of receiving regulatory approval. "We're talking about potential revenues in the hundreds of millions," Walsh explained, her presentation filled with market projections and sales forecasts. "If we can capture just 5% of the commercial trucking market, this system could become Lancaster Technologies' flagship product." The numbers were staggering, but Luis couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching someone else's future unfold. The retrofit system had been born from his desire to save lives, but it was evolving into a corporate product that would generate profits for people who'd never worked a night shift or worried about making rent. "What about the inventor's share?" Luis asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Sterling, who'd remained silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "That depends on the contractual arrangements. Most consulting agreements provide for a percentage of profits, but the specifics would need to be negotiated." Luis recognized the careful language of someone who'd spent decades ensuring that inventors received as little as possible while corporations captured the maximum value. The same dynamic that had stolen credit for his racing innovations was preparing to repeat itself with the retrofit system. "We need to discuss this privately," Aria said, sensing the tension in the room. "Luis, could we talk after the meeting?" The conversation that followed revealed the complexity of translating innovation into commercial success. Aria genuinely wanted to ensure that Luis received fair compensation for his invention, but she also had to navigate corporate structures that were designed to minimize payments to individual contributors. "I can guarantee you a position as chief technical consultant," she said, her office windows overlooking the city where his deportation hearing would take place, plus royalties on every unit sold. But I need you to understand that bringing this to market requires resources that only a corporation can provide. Luis appreciated her honesty, but he also recognized the fundamental inequality in their negotiation. Aria could walk away from the project and return to her comfortable life, while he faced the destruction of everything he'd built. The retrofit system represented his last chance to create something meaningful, to leave a legacy that would outlast his presence in America. "I understand," he said simply, "but I need to tell you something that might change your perspective." The deportation notice felt like a lead weight in his wallet as Luis considered how much to reveal. Aria had shown him respect and friendship, but she was also a corporate executive who might view his immigration status as a liability rather than a challenge to overcome. "I may not be able to see this project through to completion," he said carefully. "There are some legal issues that could affect my ability to remain in the country." Aria's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as the implications became clear. "Immigration issues?" Luis nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I've been undocumented for 23 years. Someone reported my status, and I have a deportation hearing in 3 weeks." The silence that followed felt endless. Luis had just revealed the vulnerability that had shaped his entire adult life, the secret that had kept him invisible despite his extraordinary capabilities. He'd given Aria the power to destroy him, trusting that their partnership meant more than corporate convenience. "We'll fight this," she said finally, her voice carrying the determination that had built her empire. "I know immigration lawyers who specialize in cases like yours. We'll find a way to keep you here." "It's not that simple," Luis replied. "I've been working without documentation for decades. The system isn't designed to reward people like me, no matter how valuable our contributions might be." "Then we'll change the system," Aria said, her business instincts engaging with the challenge. "You're not just any undocumented worker, you're an innovator whose invention could save thousands of lives. That has to count for something." Luis felt a flicker of hope despite the overwhelming odds. Aria's confidence was infectious and her resources were considerable. But he also understood that immigration law cared little for innovation or humanitarian impact. The deportation machinery ground forward, regardless of individual circumstances, and stopping it required more than good intentions. "There's something else," Luis said. "If I'm deported, the patent rights become complicated. I'm not sure how intellectual property law works when the inventor is no longer in the country." The practical implications were staggering. Luis's deportation wouldn't just destroy his family, it could derail the entire retrofit project, leaving thousands of potential lives unsaved because of bureaucratic inflexibility. "We'll figure it out," Aria said, but Luis heard the uncertainty in her voice. "The important thing is keeping you and your family together. Everything else is secondary." As Luis drove home that evening, he felt the weight of multiple crises converging. The deportation notice represented the immediate threat, but Sterling's opposition suggested deeper challenges ahead. His invention had the potential to change the world, but only if he could survive the forces that were aligning against him. Miguel was doing homework when Luis arrived home, his son's mathematical equations covering the kitchen table like a map of possibilities. Sofia sat nearby, her therapy journal open to a page filled with mechanical drawings that showed her continued progress in understanding and communicating complex ideas. "Dad, Mrs. Chen wants to know if you can look at her car this weekend," Miguel said without looking up from his calculus. "She says it's making the same noise as last time, but different." Luis smiled despite his troubles. Even facing deportation, he remained a resource for his community, a person whose skills mattered regardless of his legal status. The retrofit system might make him famous, but helping neighbors with car repairs had always been his real contribution to American life. "Tell her I'll take a look Saturday morning," he said, settling into his chair at the kitchen table. "But first, I need to have a serious conversation with you and Sophia." The deportation notice would have to come out of his wallet eventually, and his children deserved to know what their family was facing. But for now, Luis wanted to preserve the illusion that hard work and good intentions were enough to overcome any obstacle. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood continued, children playing, cars passing, the ordinary rhythm of a community that had accepted him long before America had decided whether he belonged. The deportation notice might determine his legal status, but it couldn't change the fact that this was home, that his roots ran deeper than any government document could acknowledge. Luis opened his notebook and began sketching improvements to the retrofit system, his hands moving with the steady precision of someone who'd learned to find hope in the act of creation. Whatever happened at the deportation hearing, he would continue working until the last possible moment, driven by the belief that innovation and persistence could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The email arrived in Richard Sterling's inbox at 6:47 a.m., marked with the red flag that indicated priority correspondence. The sender's address, rsterling@lancastertech.com. Mail to rsterling@lancastertech.com. Meant that Sterling was essentially emailing himself, a digital sleight of hand that would make the message appear to come from an external source when forwarded to other recipients. The subject line read, background check, Luis Eduardo Reyes, and the body contained information that Sterling had compiled through private investigative channels. Luis's immigration status, his undocumented work history, and his potential vulnerabilities were laid out in clinical detail, ready to be weaponized against Aria's retrofit project. Sterling had spent 30 years in Silicon Valley, watching startups rise and fall, observing the patterns that separated lasting success from temporary innovation. The retrofit system represented exactly the kind of disruption that threatened established order, a genuine breakthrough that came from outside traditional channels, developed by someone who didn't understand the unwritten rules of corporate hierarchy. More troubling was Aria's obvious commitment to the project and her growing partnership with Luis. Sterling had built his career on maintaining predictable relationships with manageable risks, but Luis represented chaos, a variable that couldn't be controlled through standard corporate mechanisms. The private investigator's report revealed exactly the leverage Sterling needed. Luis's deportation hearing, his family's dependence on his income, and his complete lack of legal protections made him incredibly vulnerable to pressure. A well-timed revelation of his immigration status could destroy both the man and the project, restoring the natural order that Sterling preferred. But Sterling was too experienced to move directly. Instead, he crafted a strategy that would appear to protect Lancaster Technologies while actually sabotaging the retrofit system. The corporate sabotage email was designed to look like concerned oversight, a responsible executive raising legitimate questions about due diligence and risk management. Aria, the email began, I've been conducting routine background checks on our external consultants, and I've discovered some issues with Luis Reyes that require immediate attention. Please see the attached report, and let's discuss the appropriate response. The attached report was a masterpiece of selective information, emphasizing Luis's lack of formal credentials while downplaying his extraordinary achievements. His racing background was portrayed as irrelevant to modern engineering challenges, his current employment as evidence of instability, and his immigration status as a liability that could expose Lancaster Technologies to federal investigation. Given these findings, Sterling's email concluded, I recommend we suspend the retrofit project pending a full legal review. We cannot afford to associate Lancaster Technologies with individuals who may be in violation of federal immigration laws. At his kitchen table, Luis was teaching Miguel advanced diagnostic techniques, while Sofia worked on mathematical problems that Dr. Martinez had assigned as part of her cognitive development therapy. The morning routine had become a sanctuary of normalcy, despite the deportation hearing that loomed just 2 weeks away. The key is understanding how systems talk to each other, Luis explained, his hands moving over a diagram of the retrofit system's sensor network. Every component sends signals, but you have to know how to interpret what they're saying. Miguel absorbed the lesson with the intensity of someone who understood that his father's knowledge represented more than technical training. It was a legacy being passed down, a connection to expertise that couldn't be replicated through formal education. "Dad, what happens if the deportation hearing doesn't go well?" Miguel asked, his voice carrying the weight of a 16-year-old who'd been forced to contemplate adult realities. Luis paused, considering how much truth his son could handle. "We'll face whatever comes, mijo, but remember, knowledge belongs to you forever. Nobody can take away what you've learned, regardless of what else happens." Sophia looked up from her mathematics, her expression showing the kind of understanding that transcended verbal communication. She'd been following the family's conversations with the intense focus she brought to everything, and Luis suspected she understood more about their situation than anyone realized. "Sophia wants to show you something," Miguel said, interpreting his sister's body language with the fluency that came from years of practice. "She's been working on improvements to the retrofit system." The therapy journal contained sketches that took Luis's breath away. Sophia had somehow intuited the system's limitations and developed solutions that addressed problems he hadn't even recognized. Her drawings showed sensor configurations that would provide more accurate data, circuit modifications that would improve response times, and mechanical adjustments that would reduce manufacturing costs. "She's been listening to your conversations with the engineering team," Miguel explained. "Then she goes to her room and works on these designs. I think she understands the system better than anyone." Luis studied his daughter's work with growing amazement. Sophia had identified inefficiencies in the retrofit system that had escaped the notice of Lancaster Technologies' experienced engineers. Her autism spectrum condition, which made social interaction challenging, had also given her the ability to perceive mechanical relationships with extraordinary clarity. "We need to show these to Ms. Lancaster," he said, recognizing that Sophia's contributions could revolutionize the entire project. These improvements could make the system even more effective. The conversation was interrupted by Luis's phone, buzzing with a text message from Aria. "Emergency meeting. Sterling's making moves against the project. Can you be here in an hour?" Luis felt his stomach drop as he read the message. The deportation hearing was still 2 weeks away, but Sterling's opposition suggested that the corporate threats might materialize even faster than the legal ones. "I have to go to the office," he told his children. "Miguel, can you take Sophia to her therapy session this afternoon?" "Of course, Dad. But is everything okay?" Luis forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just business complications. Nothing we can't handle." The drive to Lancaster Technologies felt like traveling toward a battlefield where he didn't know the rules of engagement. Luis had spent his life solving mechanical problems, but corporate politics operated according to principles that remained mysterious to him. Aria was waiting in her office when he arrived, her expression grim and her usually perfect composure showing cracks of stress. The corporate sabotage email was displayed on her computer screen, its contents representing a strategic assault on everything they'd built together. "Sterling's moving against us," she said without preamble. "He's using your immigration status as a weapon to kill the project." Luis read the email with growing understanding of how thoroughly he'd been investigated and how completely his vulnerabilities had been catalogued. Sterling's report was accurate but incomplete, emphasizing risks while ignoring the extraordinary value of Luis's contributions. "He's smart," Luis said with grudging respect. "He's not attacking the technology, he's attacking me. If I'm eliminated, the project dies with me." "That's not going to happen," Aria replied, her voice carrying the determination that had built her empire. "I've already spoken to our legal team about immigration options, and I'm prepared to fight Sterling in the boardroom." But Luis understood the dynamics better than she did. Sterling had chosen his battlefield carefully, using legitimate concerns about legal liability to mask what was essentially a power play designed to maintain corporate control. "He's going to force a board vote," Luis said, "and he's going to win because most board members will see me as a risk they can't afford to take." "Then we'll change the conversation," Aria said, We'll show them that you're not just another consultant, you're the key to a technology that could save thousands of lives and generate hundreds of millions in revenue. Luis appreciated her confidence, but he also recognized the trap that Sterling had constructed. The deportation hearing would occur before any board vote, and Luis's removal from the country would make the entire discussion academic. "There's something else," Luis said, pulling out Sophia's therapy journal. "My daughter has been working on improvements to the retrofit system. Her designs could address several of the technical limitations we've been discussing." Aria examined Sophia's sketches with growing amazement. The 12-year-old had identified solutions that could reduce manufacturing costs by 30% while improving system reliability. Her autism spectrum condition had given her the ability to perceive mechanical relationships with extraordinary clarity. "This is incredible," Aria said. "Sophia's not just understanding the system, she's improving it. These modifications could revolutionize the entire project." "She's been following our conversations and working on these designs in her spare time," Luis explained. "I think she sees patterns that the rest of us miss." The revelation added another layer of complexity to their situation. Sophia's contributions made the retrofit system even more valuable, but they also highlighted what would be lost if Luis was deported. The Reyes family didn't just represent individual talent, they were a collective resource that could drive innovation for decades. "We need to document Sophia's contributions," Aria said. "If Sterling wants to question the value of your family's involvement, we'll show him exactly what he'd be throwing away." But Luis understood that Sterling's opposition wasn't really about value, it was about control. The retrofit system represented the kind of grassroots innovation that threatened established hierarchies, and Sophia's genius only made that threat more acute. "Sterling's not going to be impressed by a 12-year-old's drawings," Luis said. "He'll dismiss them as irrelevant, regardless of their technical merit." "Then we'll find another way," Aria replied. "I didn't build this company by accepting limitations. Sterling thinks he can use corporate politics to destroy genuine innovation, but he's about to learn that some battles are worth fighting." As Luis drove home that afternoon, he reflected on the forces that were aligning against his family. The deportation hearing represented the immediate threat, but Sterling's corporate sabotage suggested that even legal victory might not be enough to protect the retrofit project. Miguel was waiting with Sophia when Luis arrived home, both children showing the kind of anxious awareness that came from living in a household where adult problems couldn't be completely hidden. "How did the meeting go?" Miguel asked. Luis considered how much to reveal. "There are some people who don't want our project to succeed, but Ms. Lancaster is fighting for us, and we're not giving up." Sophia approached with her therapy journal, pointing to a new drawing that showed the retrofit system installed in a truck. But this wasn't just a technical diagram, it was a story told through images, showing how the system would save a driver's life, protect his family, and allow him to continue working. "She understands what we're really trying to do," Miguel said, interpreting his sister's artwork. "It's not just about the technology, it's about keeping families together." Luis nodded, recognizing the profound truth in his daughter's vision. The retrofit system had always been about more than mechanical innovation. It was about dignity, safety, and the belief that every person deserved to make it home safely. "We're going to keep fighting," he told his children. "Whatever happens, we're not going to let them stop us from helping people." Outside, the neighborhood continued its evening rhythm, children playing, families gathering for dinner. The ordinary life of a community that had accepted the Reyes family long before America had decided whether they belonged. The corporate sabotage email might represent Sterling's attempt to destroy their project, but it also revealed the power of what they'd built together. Innovation that threatened established order was innovation worth protecting, and Luis was beginning to understand that the battle for the retrofit system was really a battle for the soul of American ingenuity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Luis would work on refining Sophia's improvements, guided by the belief that genuine solutions couldn't be defeated by corporate politics or bureaucratic obstacles. The retrofit system had been born from necessity, and it would survive through persistence, one improvement at a time. The trophy had been hidden in the garage workshop for 15 years, wrapped in an old blanket and tucked behind a stack of automotive manuals that Luis rarely referenced anymore. Miguel discovered it while searching for a specific torque wrench, his hand brushing against the metallic surface that had once represented the pinnacle of his father's achievements. "Dad, what's this?" Miguel called out, his voice carrying the curiosity that came from finding something that clearly didn't belong among the everyday tools. Luis looked up from the retrofit system prototype he'd been testing, his expression shifting from concentration to something that looked almost like panic. The trophy represented a part of his life that he'd deliberately buried, a reminder of accomplishments that had been stolen and recognition that had been denied. "It's nothing important," Luis said, moving quickly to take the trophy from his son's hands. "Just an old award from my racing days." But Miguel had already read the inscription, his eyes widening as he absorbed the implications of what he'd discovered. Formula One Championship, Best Mechanic, 1998, Luis El Fantasma Reyes. The silence that followed felt like a revelation and a confrontation simultaneously. Luis had spent 15 years hiding his true identity, presenting himself as a simple warehouse worker who'd once worked on race cars. The trophy revealed something far more significant. He hadn't just worked in motorsports, he'd been a champion. "El Fantasma," Miguel whispered, the Spanish words carrying weight that transcended their literal meaning. "The ghost. Dad, you were famous." Sophia emerged from the house, drawn by the unusual tension in her father's voice. She approached the trophy with her characteristic intensity, her fingers tracing the engraved surface as if she could read the story it contained. "It was a long time ago," Luis said, his voice carrying the weight of memories both proud and painful. "Different life, different world. That man doesn't exist anymore." "But why didn't you tell us?" Miguel asked, his voice mixing hurt with amazement. "You were a championship-winning mechanic. You had recognition, respect, success. Why would you hide something like that?" Luis sank into his workbench chair, the trophy feeling heavier in his hands than it had on the day he'd received it. The story that emerged was more complex than his children had imagined. A tale of genius recognized and then systematically erased by an industry that couldn't acknowledge excellence from an undocumented worker. "I was the chief mechanic for the Valdez racing team," Luis began, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone who'd learned to measure his words. "We won the Formula One Constructors' Championship in 1998, and I was recognized as the best mechanic in the sport. But recognition and acceptance are different things. The racing world had been brutal to undocumented workers, even those with extraordinary abilities. Luis had been tolerated because his skills were undeniable, but he'd never been truly accepted. His innovations were implemented without attribution, his strategies were adopted without credit, and his presence was acknowledged only when convenient. "The trophy was given to me at a private ceremony," Luis continued. "The team owner, Carlos Valdez, wanted to recognize my contributions, but he couldn't do it publicly. I was El Fantasma, the ghost, because I existed in the shadows, invisible to the official records." Miguel listened with growing understanding of how his father's talents had been systematically exploited. The man who'd taught him to value honesty and hard work had been forced to hide his greatest achievements, to accept invisibility as the price of pursuing his passion. "What happened to Carlos Valdez?" Miguel asked. Luis's expression darkened as he confronted memories he'd spent years trying to forget. "He died in a racing accident 2 years after we won the championship. A crash that shouldn't have happened, caused by a safety system failure that I'd warned the team about months earlier." The revelation hit Miguel like a physical blow. His father hadn't just been a successful mechanic, been a safety innovator whose warnings had been ignored, whose expertise had been dismissed despite his proven track record. "I'd designed modifications to the roll cage system that would have prevented that type of accident," Luis continued, "but the other engineers rejected my proposals, said they were too radical, too expensive. Carlos trusted their judgment over mine." Sophia moved closer to her father, her therapy journal clutched against her chest. She'd been following the conversation with the intense focus she brought to everything, and Luis suspected she understood more about the emotional undercurrents than anyone realized. After Carlos died, the team was sold to new owners who wanted to start fresh, Luis said. My innovations were implemented, but the credit was given to others. My designs were patented, but the applications listed different inventors. I became invisible again, but this time permanently. The pattern was devastatingly familiar. Luis's genius had been exploited, his contributions had been stolen, and his identity had been erased by people who could legally claim credit for his work. The racing trophy represented both his greatest triumph and his most profound betrayal. That's when I met your mother, Luis said, his voice softening as he remembered Maria's unwavering support. She was working as a translator for the racing circuit, and she saw what was happening to me. She convinced me to leave racing, to find a different way to use my skills. Miguel felt a surge of anger at the injustice his father had endured. But you could have fought back, exposed what they were doing. You had proof of your contributions. With what resources? Luis replied. Patent attorneys cost more than I made in a year. The racing establishment protected itself, and I had no legal standing to challenge them. I was invisible, remember? Ghosts don't win court cases. The conversation was interrupted by Luis's phone, buzzing with a call from Aria. Her voice carried unusual urgency as she spoke, and Luis found himself agreeing to meet her at the office within the hour. I have to go, he told his children. But Miguel, I need you to understand something. That trophy represents a part of my life that I chose to leave behind. I don't want you to see it as a tragedy. I want you to see it as a choice. I chose your mother. I chose this family. I chose to build something meaningful rather than chase recognition. As Luis drove toward Lancaster Technologies, he reflected on the implications of his children discovering his true identity. The trophy had been hidden for good reasons. It represented vulnerabilities that could be exploited, a past that could be weaponized against him. Aria was waiting in her office with an expression that suggested she'd received troubling news. The corporate sabotage email was displayed on her computer screen, but now it was accompanied by additional documents that Sterling had somehow obtained. Richard's been digging deeper into your background, she said without preamble. He's found racing records, championship results, and patent applications that list you as the primary inventor. Luis felt his stomach drop as he realized the scope of Sterling's investigation. What kind of patent applications? Safety systems, engine modifications, aerodynamic improvements, dozens of innovations that were apparently developed during your racing career but patented by other people. Aria's voice carried a mixture of amazement and outrage. Luis, you're not just a mechanic, you're one of the most innovative engineers in automotive history. The revelation that Sterling had uncovered his El Fantasma identity created new complications beyond the deportation hearing. Luis's racing achievements could be used to support his value to Lancaster Technologies, but they also revealed the extent to which his contributions had been stolen throughout his career. Sterling's using this against us, Luis said, understanding the political calculations involved. He's going to argue that I'm a liability because my innovations have been systematically plagiarized. He'll say that working with me exposes Lancaster Technologies to intellectual property disputes. Actually, it's worse than that, Aria replied. He's found a connection between your racing career and my foundation's charitable work. Apparently, the Lancaster Foundation has been funding safety research that's directly based on innovations you developed 15 years ago. The irony was staggering. Aria's foundation had been unknowingly supporting research that built on Luis's stolen innovations, while he'd remained invisible and unrewarded. The charitable work that had earned her recognition was partially based on his unacknowledged contributions. The safety modifications that Carlos Valdez died testing, Luis said slowly, they were eventually implemented across the entire racing industry. Your foundation has been funding programs that study their effectiveness, which means we've been celebrating safety improvements that you invented, Aria said, her voice carrying a mixture of admiration and guilt. Your innovations have saved thousands of lives, but you've never received credit or compensation. The discovery created a moral complexity that transcended their business relationship. Aria had built her philanthropic reputation partly on recognizing innovations that Luis had created, while he'd been forced to remain invisible despite his extraordinary contributions. "Sterling's going to use this to destroy both of us," Luis said. "He'll argue that our partnership represents a conflict of interest, that I'm trying to claim credit for innovations that have already been recognized and rewarded. Then we'll beat him at his own game." Aria replied, her business instincts engaging with the challenge. "If Sterling wants to make this about intellectual property, we'll show him exactly who the real innovator is." But Luis understood the deeper implications of his exposed identity. El Fantasma had been a ghost precisely because visibility brought danger. The racing world had tolerated his presence as long as he remained invisible, but recognition would bring scrutiny that could destroy everything he'd built. "My deportation hearing is in 10 days, he said. "If Sterling reveals my racing background to immigration authorities, it could complicate my case. They might see my success as evidence that I should have applied for legal status years ago. Or they might see it as evidence that America benefits from your presence." Aria countered. "You're not just any undocumented worker. You're a proven innovator whose contributions have saved lives." The conversation was interrupted by Miguel calling with urgent news. "Dad, someone's been asking questions about you in the neighborhood." A man in a suit showing pictures, asking about your work schedule. Luis felt the familiar chill of being hunted. Sterling's investigation had apparently expanded beyond corporate records to include personal surveillance. The deportation hearing was still 10 days away, but the machinery of removal was already grinding toward its conclusion. "I have to go," Luis told Aria. "My family's being investigated, and I need to make sure they're safe." "We'll figure this out," she said, but Luis heard the uncertainty in her voice. "Your identity as El Fantasma doesn't change our partnership, strengthens it. You're not just a mechanic with a good idea. You're a legendary innovator whose work has shaped an entire industry." As Luis drove home, he reflected on the irony that his greatest strength had become his greatest vulnerability. The trophy that Miguel had discovered represented both his proudest achievement and his most dangerous secret. El Fantasma had been a ghost for good reasons, and his resurrection threatened to destroy everything he'd built in the shadows. The retrofit system had been born from the same innovative spirit that had won championships, but its success depended on Luis remaining invisible long enough to see it reach production. The deportation hearing would determine whether El Fantasma could finally step into the light, or whether the ghost would be exorcised forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Luis would work on the retrofit system with the knowledge that his true identity had been revealed. The trophy sat on his workbench like a bridge between his past and future, a reminder that genius couldn't be hidden forever, but that its revelation always came with a price. The startup pitch deck had taken shape over 3 sleepless nights, each slide representing a synthesis of corporate polish and street-smart innovation that neither Luis nor Aria could have created alone. The presentation merged technical specifications with market projections, humanitarian impact with profit potential, and personal story with business strategy. Innovation Safety Solutions, the title slide read, with a subtitle that captured their unified vision: democratizing life, saving technology through accessible innovation. Luis sat in Aria's home office at 2 a.m., surrounded by the detritus of their collaborative effort-empty coffee cups, scattered documents, and prototype components that had been disassembled and rebuilt multiple times. The deportation hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., just 7 hours away, but they'd agreed to finalize the presentation before confronting the immigration court. "The financial projections are solid," Aria said, adjusting the charts that showed potential market penetration. "If we can capture just 10% of the commercial trucking market, we're looking at first-year revenues of $300 million. But Luis was focused on different metrics: the lives that could be saved, the families that would remain intact, the the communities that would benefit from technology that prioritized human welfare over profit margins. The retrofit system had evolved beyond a simple mechanical device into a symbol of what innovation could accomplish when it emerged from genuine need rather than market opportunity. The board meeting is scheduled for 2 p.m., Aria continued. Assuming the immigration hearing goes well, Sterling's been building opposition, but I think we can overcome it if we present a united front. Luis nodded, though his attention was divided between the presentation and the legal documents that would determine his fate in a few hours. The immigration lawyer that Aria had hired was competent and experienced, but she'd been frank about the challenges they faced. "Your case is complicated by your success," attorney Sarah Kim had explained during their final preparation meeting. "The immigration court might question why someone with your abilities didn't pursue legal status sooner. We'll need to demonstrate that your contributions to American society outweigh the technical violations." The irony wasn't lost on Luis's achievements, as El Fantasma was simultaneously his greatest asset and his most dangerous liability. The racing championships proved his value to American industry, but they also revealed that he'd been working illegally at the highest levels of international competition. Miguel appeared in the doorway, his teenage frame silhouetted against the hallway light. "Dad, you should try to get some sleep. The hearing's in a few hours." "I can't sleep," Luis replied, his hands continuing to work on the presentation despite his exhaustion. "Too much depends on today." Sophia emerged from behind her brother, her therapy journal clutched against her chest. She'd been following the family's conversations with characteristic intensity, and Luis suspected she understood more about their situation than anyone realized. "She wants to come to the hearing," Miguel said, interpreting his sister's body language. "She says she has something important to show the judge." Luis felt a surge of protective concern. The immigration court isn't a place for children. It's too formal, too intimidating. But Sophia approached with her journal open to a page that took Luis's breath away. Her drawing showed the retrofit system not as a mechanical device, but as a bridge connecting two community immigrant workers and the American families whose lives they protected. The image was simultaneously sophisticated and innocent, capturing the human impact of technology in ways that corporate presentations couldn't match. "She's been working on this for weeks," Miguel explained. "Ever since she learned about the deportation hearing, I think she sees the retrofit system as more than just a safety device. She sees it as proof that we belong here." Aria studied Sophia's artwork with growing amazement. The 12-year-old had captured something that eluded most adults, the recognition that innovation transcended legal status, that genius couldn't be contained by borders or documents. "This should be part of the presentation," Aria said. "Sophia's perspective shows the human side of what we're trying to accomplish." Luis considered the suggestion carefully. Including Sophia's artwork would personalize their argument, but it would also expose his daughter to scrutiny that could prove harmful regardless of the outcome. "The board meeting is about business," he said finally. "Sophia's drawings are beautiful, but they won't convince investors or board members." "You're wrong," Aria replied. "Business is ultimately about people, about solving problems that matter to real individuals. Sophia's artwork shows that better than any financial projection." The conversation was interrupted by Luis's phone buzzing with a text from Dr. Martinez, Sophia's therapist. "Thinking of you today. Sophia's progress has been remarkable, and I'm available if you need professional testimony about her development." The offer represented another layer of complexity. Dr. Martinez's testimony could support their argument about the family's integration into American society, but it would also reveal Sophia's autism diagnosis, potentially creating new vulnerabilities. "We need to focus on the core argument," Luis said, his exhaustion making decision-making more difficult. "I'm a valuable innovator whose contributions outweigh my technical violations. Everything else is distraction." But Aria understood that their strongest argument transcended technical considerations. Luis wasn't just an innovator, he was a father, a community member, and a person whose removal would harm not just his family, but the broader society that had benefited from his contributions. "The immigration hearing is at 9 a.m., she said, checking her watch. "Board meeting at 2 p.m. That gives us 5 hours to prepare for the corporate presentation, assuming the hearing goes well." "And if it doesn't?" Luis asked. "Then we'll figure out how to move forward without you," Aria replied, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. "But I don't think it will come to that. Your case is strong, and you have support from people who understand your value." The support had been building throughout the week. Dr. Webb had written a letter testifying to Luis's technical expertise. Sarah Chen had documented his contributions to the retrofit system, and even Jennifer Walsh had acknowledged his marketing insights. More importantly, the immigrant community had rallied around Luis's case, recognizing that his deportation would set a precedent that could affect thousands of others. "There's something else," Luis said, pulling out a letter that had arrived the previous day. "Carlos Valdez's widow wrote to me after she learned about the deportation hearing. She wants to testify about my racing contributions." Elena Valdez had followed Luis's career from afar, watching as his innovations were implemented throughout the racing industry without acknowledgement or compensation. Her letter revealed that Carlos had left detailed records of Luis's contributions, documents that could support his immigration case. "She says Carlos kept copies of all my design specifications," Luis continued. "Patents that were filed under other names but actually originated from my work. She's willing to provide documentation that could establish my history of innovation." The revelation created new possibilities for both the immigration hearing and the board meeting. Luis's racing achievements weren't just personal accomplishments. They were documented contributions to American industry that had generated millions in revenue and saved countless lives. "We need to integrate this into both presentations," Aria said. "Your racing background isn't a liability, it's proof of your sustained contributions to American innovation." But Luis remained concerned about the political implications. Sterling's investigation had revealed the extent to which his innovations had been stolen, but it had also exposed the vulnerability of his position. The deportation hearing would determine whether his achievements mattered more than his legal status. "Miguel, I need you to take care of Sofia today," Luis said, recognizing that his son would have to shoulder adult responsibilities regardless of the hearing's outcome. "If things don't go well, you'll need to be strong for both of us." "They will go well," Miguel replied with the confidence that came from believing in his father's abilities. "You've never failed to fix anything that was broken. Today won't be different." The observation carried more weight than Miguel realized. Luis had spent his entire career solving problems that others considered impossible, finding solutions that emerged from necessity rather than resources. The deportation hearing represented just another broken system that needed repair. "Sofia wants to give you something," Miguel said, interpreting his sister's careful approach. "She says it's for luck." Sofia handed Luis a small mechanical device that she'd assembled from components in his workshop. The device was elegantly, simply miniature version of the retrofit system that demonstrated the core principles in a format that could fit in his pocket. "She built it herself," Miguel explained. "Spent 3 days working on it, using your tools and following your diagrams. She says it's proof that innovation runs in families." Luis examined his daughter's creation with growing amazement. The device was more than a miniature replicate, was a functional demonstration of the retrofit system's principles, built by someone who understood mechanical relationships intuitively. "This is incredible," he said, his voice carrying the pride of a father whose children had exceeded his greatest expectations. "Sofia, this is better than anything I could have built at your age." The device represented something beyond technical achievement. It was evidence of knowledge being passed from one generation to the next, of innovation that transcended individual circumstances. Regardless of the hearing's outcome, Luis's contributions would continue through his children. "It's 6 a.m., Aria said, checking her watch. "We should head to the courthouse. The presentation is ready, and we've done everything we can to prepare." As they gathered their materials, Luis reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 weeks ago, he'd been an invisible warehouse worker whose greatest achievement was helping neighbors with car repairs. Now he was preparing to defend his right to remain in America while simultaneously launching a company that could revolutionize vehicle safety. The retrofit system had evolved beyond a simple mechanical device into a symbol of what innovation could accomplish when it emerged from genuine need rather than market opportunity. More importantly, it had become a bridge between two worlds, connecting Luis's technical expertise with Aria's business acumen, his street-smart solutions with her corporate resources. "Whatever happens today," Luis said, as they walked toward the courthouse, "we've built something meaningful. The retrofit system will save lives, and that's what matters most." The immigration hearing would determine whether Luis could see his invention reach production, but the innovation itself had already transcended its creator. The startup pitch deck contained more than business projections. It contained a vision of how technology could serve humanity, how innovation could emerge from unexpected places, and how genius could triumph over systemic barriers. The sun was rising over San Francisco as they approached the courthouse, its light catching the city's glass towers and casting long shadows across the streets where Luis had spent 15 years building a life in America's margins. Today would determine whether he could finally step into the light, or whether El Fantasma would disappear forever into the bureaucratic machinery that had always threatened to consume him. The deportation hearing would be followed by the board meeting, two confrontations that would determine not just Luis's fate, but the future of innovation that prioritized human welfare over corporate convenience. The startup pitch deck represented their unified vision, but its success depended on Luis remaining free to implement the solutions that had emerged from his lifetime of solving problems that others considered impossible. As they entered the courthouse, Luis carried Sophia's miniature retrofit system in his pocket, a talisman that reminded him that innovation belonged to the next generation, regardless of today's outcome. The device represented continuity, hope, and the recognition that knowledge, once shared, could never be completely destroyed. The Lancaster Technologies boardroom had been transformed into a battleground where corporate politics would determine the fate of innovation that could save thousands of lives. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting the authority of someone who'd spent decades mastering the art of corporate control. The boardroom vote would determine whether Innovation Safety Solutions received the funding and support necessary to bring the retrofit system to market, or whether Sterling's campaign against Luis would succeed in killing the project entirely. The formal resolution read like a declaration of war disguised as business procedure. "The board will vote on Resolution 2024-15, Sterling announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling outcomes. "To suspend all activities related to the retrofit system pending resolution of legal and regulatory concerns." Aria entered the boardroom with Luis beside her, their partnership visible in the way they moved together despite the obvious disparity in their backgrounds. Luis wore his best sweater, 15-year-old ensemble that had been purchased for Maria's funeral, while Aria commanded attention in a tailored business dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The board members represented the spectrum of Silicon Valley power venture capitalists, tech executives, and industry leaders who'd built their fortunes on recognizing patterns and managing risks. Most had never been in the same room as someone like Luis, and their discomfort was palpable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aria began, her voice carrying the confidence that had built her empire, "we're here to discuss the most important innovation Lancaster Technologies has ever encountered. The retrofit system isn't just a product, it's a solution that will redefine vehicle safety and save thousands of lives annually." Dr. Webb connected his laptop to the boardroom's display system, and the startup pitch deck filled the wall-mounted screens. The presentation had been crafted to appeal to corporate sensibilities while preserving the humanitarian mission that drove the innovation. "The market opportunity is extraordinary," Aria continued, advancing to the financial projections. Commercial trucking represents a $400 billion industry with massive demand for affordable safety technology. Our retrofit system addresses that need with a solution that's both effective and economically viable. Sterling listened with the expression of someone who'd already decided the outcome, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that suggested impatience rather than engagement. Miss Lancaster, before we discuss market opportunities, shouldn't we address the legal complications surrounding Mr. Reyes's status? The question hung in the air like a challenge, forcing the board to confront the immigration issues that Sterling had been weaponizing against the project. Luis felt the familiar weight of being judged for his legal status rather than his contributions, but he also sensed something different in the room's atmosphere. Mr. Reyes' immigration hearing concluded this morning, Aria replied, her voice carrying news that Sterling hadn't expected. The judge granted him legal, permanent resident status based on his extraordinary contributions to American innovation and safety technology. The announcement sent ripples of surprise through the boardroom. Sterling's carefully constructed argument had been based on Luis's vulnerability, but the immigration victory had transformed him from a liability into a legal resident whose talents were officially recognized. "That's excellent news," said Margaret Chen, the board's most senior member, "but it doesn't address the broader questions about intellectual property and corporate liability." Luis stood slowly, recognizing that this moment required him to speak for himself rather than letting others define his value. "Chen, I understand your concerns about liability, but I'd like to show you something that might change your perspective." He opened his briefcase and carefully lifted out the racing trophy that Miguel had discovered weeks earlier. The engraved crystal caught the boardroom's fluorescent lights, transforming the corporate space into something that felt more like a museum of achievement. "This trophy was awarded to me in 1998 for being the best mechanic in Formula One racing," Luis said, his voice carrying the quiet pride of someone who'd learned to value accomplishments over recognition. "I was known as El Fantasmathe Ghost because my innovations were implemented throughout the racing industry without official acknowledgement." The board members leaned forward, their business instincts engaging with the revelation that their consultant wasn't just a skilled mechanic, but a legendary innovator whose work had shaped an entire industry. "The safety modifications I developed during my racing career have been standard equipment in professional motorsports for over 2 decades. Luis continued, "Those innovations have saved hundreds of lives and generated millions in revenue for manufacturers who received credit for my work." Sterling's expression shifted from confidence to concern as he realized that Luis's racing background strengthened rather than weakened his position. The very achievements that were supposed to represent liability instead demonstrated a track record of innovation that few people could match. "Mr. Reyes, this is impressive, but racing technology doesn't necessarily translate to commercial trucking," said David Kim, the board's technology specialist. "The operating conditions are completely different." Luis smiled, recognizing the challenge that would allow him to demonstrate his understanding of both industries. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Kim. Racing technology focuses on maximum performance under controlled conditions. Commercial trucking requires reliable safety under variable conditions. That's exactly why the retrofit system works. It's designed for the real world, not the racetrack." He advanced to the next slide, which showed comparative data between racing safety systems and his retrofit innovation. The presentation revealed that Luis hadn't just adapted racing technology, he'd created something entirely new that addressed the specific challenges of commercial transportation. The retrofit system uses different sensors, different algorithms, and different mechanical responses than racing safety equipment, Luis explained. It's designed to handle shifting loads, varying weather conditions, and the kind of mechanical stress that racing cars never encounter. The technical discussion that followed revealed the depth of Luis's expertise and the sophistication of his innovation. Board members who'd arrived skeptical found themselves asking increasingly detailed questions about implementation, manufacturing, and market deployment. The installation process is remarkable, said Jennifer Walsh, who'd initially opposed the project. Most commercial safety systems require specialized equipment and trained technicians. Your system can be installed by any competent mechanic in less than 4 hours. That's because it's designed by someone who understands how mechanics actually work, Luis replied. I've spent 30 years in garages and workshops, and I know what's realistic in terms of installation and maintenance. Sterling raised his hand for attention, his expression suggesting that he wasn't ready to concede defeat. Mr. Reyes, your technical expertise is impressive, but we're still talking about a massive liability exposure. If this system fails and someone gets hurt, Lancaster Technologies could face lawsuits that would destroy the company. The objection represented Sterling's final attempt to kill the project by focusing on risk rather than potential. But Luis had anticipated this argument and prepared a response that would address the board's concerns while demonstrating the system's reliability. Mr. Sterling, I understand your concerns about liability, but I'd like you to consider a different perspective, Luis said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to speak truth to power. The retrofit system has been tested under conditions that exceed anything it would encounter in normal operation. The failure rate is less than 1%, which is better than most commercial safety equipment. He pulled out a folder filled with testing data, accident reports, and performance analyses that documented the system's reliability. More importantly, the system is designed to fail safely. If any component malfunctions, the truck continues to operate normally. The system can only help it, can never hurt. The technical discussion continued for another hour, with board members asking questions that revealed both their growing interest and their remaining concerns. Luis answered each query with the patience of someone who understood that acceptance required education, that innovation succeeded through persistence rather than pressure. Sophia appeared in the boardroom doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the hallway light. She'd been waiting in the reception area with Miguel, but something had drawn her toward the meeting that would determine her family's future. I'm sorry, Miguel said, appearing behind his sister. She insisted on coming in. She says she has something important to show everyone. Sophia approached the boardroom table with her characteristic intensity, her therapy journal clutched against her chest. The board members watched with curious expressions as the 12-year-old opened her notebook to a page that would change everything. The drawing showed the retrofit system not as a mechanical device, but as a living system that connected drivers to their families, communities to their economies, and innovation to its human purpose. Sophia's artwork captured something that corporate presentations couldn't convey: the recognition that technology succeeded only when it served people. She's been working on this for weeks, Miguel explained. Ever since she learned about the project, I think she sees the retrofit system as more than just a safety device. She sees it as a way to keep families together. The boardroom fell silent as the implications of Sophia's artwork sank in. Her perspective revealed the human impact of their business decisions, the recognition that corporate votes affected real people in ways that financial projections couldn't capture. Sterling cleared his throat, his expression suggesting that he viewed Sophia's presence as an inappropriate distraction from serious business. This is touching, but we're here to make business decisions, not to be influenced by children's drawings. Actually, said Margaret Chen, studying Sophia's artwork with growing fascination, I think this young lady has captured something that we've been missing. Innovation isn't about technology, it's about solving problems that matter to real people. The comment shifted the boardroom's atmosphere from corporate calculation to human consideration. Sophia's artwork had reminded them that their vote would determine not just Lancaster Technologies' future, but the fate of families like the Reyes, who developed solutions from necessity rather than market opportunity. I'd like to call for a vote, Sterling said, recognizing that delay would only strengthen Luis's position. All in favor of Resolution 2024-15 to suspend the retrofit project. The silence that followed felt like a held breath, a moment when corporate power would either embrace innovation or preserve the status quo that had always excluded voices like Luis's. The boardroom vote would determine whether genius could triumph over privilege, whether solutions could overcome obstacles, and whether America's promise of opportunity extended to those who'd been forced to remain invisible. Sterling raised his hand in support of his own resolution, but his gesture stood alone in the boardroom's suddenly quiet space. The other board members sat motionless, their silence representing a rejection of the fear-based decision-making that had characterized their initial response to Luis's partnership with Aria. "The resolution fails," Margaret Chen announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built her career on recognizing valuable opportunities. "Mr. Reyes, congratulations. Your retrofit system has the board's full support." The victory felt both overwhelming and inevitable, a recognition that genuine innovation couldn't be defeated by corporate politics or bureaucratic obstacles. Luis looked at Sophia's drawing one more time, understanding that his daughter had captured the truth that had sustained him through decades of invisibility, that solutions emerged from love, that innovation served humanity, and that genius belonged to everyone willing to use it in service of others. The immigration stay order arrived by courier as the board meeting concluded, its official seal and legal language transforming Luis's tenuous status into concrete protection. Attorney Sarah Kim had worked through the night to expedite the paperwork, but the document represented more than bureaucratic efficiency. It was recognition that America benefited from Luis's presence. "Congratulations, Mr. Reyes," Kim said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd built her career on fighting for cases that others considered hopeless. "The judge granted you legal permanent resident status based on your extraordinary contributions to American innovation and safety technology." Luis read the document with trembling hands, the legal terminology that had once threatened to destroy his life, now offering protection and opportunity. The stay order didn't just prevent deportation, it acknowledged his value to American society and cleared the path for innovation safety solutions to move forward. "What does this mean for my children?" Luis asked, his voice carrying the weight of a father who'd spent years fearing family separation. "Miguel and Sofia are American citizens by birth," Kim replied. "Your new status means the family can remain together permanently. More importantly, you now have the legal standing to patent your innovations and receive full credit for your contributions." The irony wasn't lost on Luis. The same system that had threatened to exile him was now protecting his right to remain. But he also understood that his victory was temporary, unless innovation safety solutions succeeded in bringing the retrofit system to market. Richard Sterling gathered his papers with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to conceal defeat behind professional composure. His campaign against Luis had failed, but his influence in Silicon Valley remained considerable. The board vote represented a tactical retreat rather than strategic surrender. "Ms. Lancaster," Sterling said as he prepared to leave the boardroom, "I hope you understand the magnitude of the liability you're assuming. When this project fails, the consequences will extend far beyond your company. The only failure would be allowing fear to prevent us from saving lives," Aria replied, her voice carrying the determination that had sustained her through decades of corporate challenges. "Innovation requires courage, Richard. That's something you've forgotten." Sterling's departure left the boardroom feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the atmosphere. The remaining board members gathered around Luis and Sofia, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine enthusiasm for the project's potential. "Mr. Reyes, we'll need to discuss the formal partnership structure," Margaret Chen said, her voice carrying the brisk efficiency of someone who'd made her fortune by recognizing opportunities others missed. "Innovation safety solutions will require significant capital investment, but the potential returns are extraordinary." The business discussion that followed revealed the scope of what they were attempting to accomplish. The retrofit system would need regulatory approval, manufacturing partnerships, and distribution networks that could reach the entire commercial trucking industry. But the board's commitment provided the resources necessary to transform Luis's invention from prototype to production. "We're looking at 18 months from approval to market launch," Dr. Webb explained, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by technical enthusiasm. The system's elegance makes manufacturing relatively straightforward, but we'll need to establish quality control procedures that meet automotive industry standards. Luis listened to the planning discussions with growing amazement at the machinery being mobilized around his invention. The retrofit system had evolved from a personal mission into a corporate enterprise that would employ hundreds of people and generate millions in revenue. "What about the community impact?" Luis asked, his voice carrying the concern of someone who'd never forgotten where innovation came from. "I want to make sure that the people who need this technology most can afford it." "We'll establish a sliding scale pricing structure," Aria said, recognizing that Luis's values needed to be preserved even as the project scaled to commercial proportions. "Fleet owners will pay full price, but independent truck drivers will have access to financing that makes the system affordable." The conversation was interrupted by Miguel approaching the boardroom table with his laptop computer. "Dad, I've been working on something that might help with the marketing strategy. Can I show everyone what I've developed?" Miguel's presentation revealed a software platform that would allow truck drivers to monitor their retrofit systems remotely, track performance data, and receive maintenance alerts through their smartphones. The system was elegant in its simplicity, but it also demonstrated the kind of technological sophistication that Silicon Valley respected. "I built this using open-source frameworks and cloud computing resources," Miguel explained, his teenage nervousness evident despite his technical competence. "The platform can handle thousands of users simultaneously and provides real-time data that helps drivers optimize their system performance." The board members leaned forward with expressions of growing interest. Miguel had identified a revenue stream that none of them had considered. The retrofit system wasn't just a one-time sale, but a platform for ongoing services and data analytics. "This is remarkable," said David Kim, the board's technology specialist. "You've created a comprehensive ecosystem around your father's invention." The software platform could generate subscription revenues that exceed the hardware sales. Luis felt a surge of pride as he watched his son present ideas that would enhance and expand the retrofit system's impact. Miguel had inherited his mother's mathematical mind and his father's mechanical intuition, but he'd also developed business instincts that transcended both parents' experiences. "The platform also includes educational components," Miguel continued, advancing to screenshots that showed training modules and safety tutorials. "New drivers can learn to use the system effectively, and experienced drivers can share their knowledge with the community." Sophia moved closer to the presentation screen, her therapy journal open to pages that showed her own contributions to the project. Her drawings had evolved from simple mechanical diagrams to complex systems that integrated her father's retrofit technology with her brother's software platform. "She's been working on user interface designs," Miguel explained, interpreting his sister's careful gestures. "Sophia understands how drivers think and what kind of information they need. Her designs make complex data accessible to people who might not be comfortable with technology." The revelation that Sophia had been contributing to the project's development added another layer of complexity to their partnership. The Reyes family didn't just represent individual talent, they were a collective resource that could drive innovation for decades. "We're not just investing in a product," Margaret Chen observed, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd built her fortune on recognizing human potential. "We're investing in a family whose combined talents could revolutionize multiple industries." The formal partnership agreement took another hour to outline, but the basic structure was clear. Innovation's safety solutions would be jointly owned by Lancaster Technologies and the Reyes family, with Luis serving as Chief Technical Officer and Aria as Chief Executive Officer. Miguel would head software development, while Sophia would continue contributing to user experience design through her ongoing therapy sessions. "The company will be headquartered in San Francisco," Aria announced, "but will maintain significant operations in East San Jose. Innovation emerges from communities, and we want to ensure that the people who inspired this technology continue to benefit from its success." The decision to maintain operations in Luis's neighborhood represented more than geographical convenience. It was recognition that innovation belonged to the communities that nurtured it, that success required staying connected to the human needs that drove technological development. "There's one more thing," Luis said, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone who'd learned to value symbolic as well as practical considerations. "I want to establish a scholarship program for undocumented students who show exceptional abilities in science and engineering. Innovation shouldn't be limited by legal status." The proposal revealed the depth of Luis's commitment to expanding opportunity beyond his own family. The scholarship program would ensure that other young people facing similar challenges could pursue their dreams without the barriers that had limited his own recognition. "That's an excellent idea," Aria said, her voice carrying genuine enthusiasm for the humanitarian mission that had always driven their partnership. "We'll establish the Luis Reyes Innovation Scholarship as part of our corporate social responsibility program." The afternoon concluded with handshakes, business cards, and the promise of formal contracts that would transform their collaboration into a legally binding partnership. But the real agreement transcended corporate documents. It was a commitment to innovation that served humanity, to success that lifted up entire communities, and to recognition that genius could emerge from any circumstance. As the boardroom emptied, Luis stood with his family beside the window, overlooking San Francisco's skyline. The city stretched before them like a map of possibilities, its glass towers reflecting the afternoon sun in patterns that suggested both achievement and aspiration. "What happens now?" Miguel asked, his voice carrying the excitement of someone whose future had suddenly expanded beyond his wildest dreams. "Now we go to work," Luis replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd finally found the platform to implement solutions that had been developing for decades. "The retrofit system is just the beginning. We have the resources and the recognition to tackle problems that affect millions of people." Sophia pressed her therapy journal against the window glass, her drawings creating patterns that seemed to merge with the city's architecture. Her artwork had become part of the corporate presentation, but it remained fundamentally personal, record of progress that transcended therapeutic goals to become a document of family achievement. "She says she wants to design safety systems for school buses." Miguel translated his interpretation of Sophia's gestures, revealing her expanding ambitions. "She thinks children deserve the same protection as truck drivers." The observation represented the kind of insight that had always distinguished the Reyes family's approach to innovation. They didn't just solve problems, they identified needs that others overlooked, developing solutions that served the most vulnerable members of society. "We'll work on school bus safety next," Luis promised, recognizing that his daughter's suggestion represented a natural evolution of their mission. "But first, we need to bring the retrofit system to market and prove that innovation can succeed when it prioritizes human welfare over profit margins." The immigration stay order sat in Luis's briefcase like a bridge between his invisible past and his visible future. The document represented more than legal protection. It was acknowledgement that America benefited from his presence, that his contributions outweighed his technical violations, and that genius belonged to everyone willing to use it in service of others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as innovation safety solutions began the complex process of bringing the retrofit system to market. But tonight, Luis would return to his duplex in East San Jose as a legal resident whose innovations had been recognized, whose family was secure, and whose future was finally bright with possibility. The corporate sabotage campaign that had threatened to destroy their partnership had instead strengthened their resolve. Sterling's defeat represented more than a business victory. It was proof that innovation could triumph over fear, that solutions could overcome obstacles, and that America's promise of opportunity extended to those who'd been forced to remain invisible. The retrofit system would save thousands of lives, but its greater impact would be demonstrating that genius could emerge from any circumstance, that communities could nurture innovation, and that success was measured not just in revenue, but in the recognition that everyone deserved to make it home safely. 6 months after the board meeting that changed everything, Louise stood in the Innovation Safety Solutions headquarters, watching the morning shift arrive at the manufacturing facility that had transformed his neighborhood. The building had once housed a textile factory, but now it produced the retrofit systems that were becoming standard equipment in commercial trucks across America. The scarlet Ferrari Fate Tributo sat in the parking lot, its engine purring with the smooth precision that only came from expert maintenance. But the car's significance had evolved beyond its original symbolism. It no longer represented the divide between wealth and poverty, but rather the bridge that had connected two worlds and created something neither could have achieved alone. "Production is exceeding our projections," Aria said, joining Luis at the window, overlooking the assembly floor. "We've installed retrofit systems in over 12,000 vehicles, and the safety data is remarkable. Rollover accidents are down 67% among fleet drivers using our technology." Luis nodded, his attention focused on the workers below, who were assembling devices that would save lives he'd never meet. The manufacturing facility employed 340 people, most of them from the surrounding neighborhood, transforming Innovation Safety Solutions into more than a company. It had become a community anchor that provided good jobs and economic stability. "The scholarship program is exceeding expectations too," Aria continued, reviewing the tablet that contained updates on their various initiatives. 43 undocumented students have received full college scholarships in engineering and computer science. Miguel's platform is tracking their progress, and the results are extraordinary. The Luis Reyes Innovation Scholarship had become the company's signature social impact program, providing educational opportunities for young people who faced the same barriers that had limited his own recognition. The scholarship recipients were studying at universities across the country, their potential finally unleashed despite their immigration status. Miguel emerged from the software development center, his teenage awkwardness replaced by the confident bearing of someone whose innovations were changing an entire industry. The remote monitoring platform had evolved into a comprehensive ecosystem that served over 50,000 truck drivers, providing real-time safety data, predictive maintenance alerts, and community support networks. "Dad, the latest performance analytics are incredible," Miguel said, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who'd found his calling. "The retrofit systems aren't just preventing accidents, they're helping drivers optimize their routes, reduce fuel consumption, and improve their overall safety records." The platform's success had attracted attention from transportation companies worldwide, but Miguel had insisted on maintaining the community-focused approach that distinguished Innovation Safety Solutions from purely profit-driven competitors. The software included educational components, peer-to-peer support networks, and resources specifically designed for immigrant drivers who faced unique challenges. Sophia appeared from the design studio, her therapy journal replaced by a professional sketchbook that contained architectural plans for the school bus safety systems she'd been developing. At 13, she'd become the company's youngest consultant, her autism spectrum condition providing insights that neurotypical designers consistently missed. "She's completed the prototype designs for the school bus project," Miguel translated, his fluency in Sophia's non-verbal communication unchanged, despite their dramatically different circumstances. "The system adapts the retrofit technology for vehicles that carry children with enhanced emergency response capabilities." Luis examined his daughter's latest drawings with the same amazement he'd felt when she first showed him improvements to the original retrofit system. Sophia's perspective revealed safety considerations that experienced engineers had overlooked, solutions that emerged from her unique ability to perceive patterns and relationships. The school bus project represented the company's commitment to expanding safety technology beyond commercial trucking. Sophia's designs had caught the attention of school districts nationwide, and preliminary testing suggested that her innovations could prevent thousands of accidents involving children. Dr. Martinez says Sophia's progress has been unprecedented, Aria said, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd witnessed the family's transformation. The combination of meaningful work and social recognition has accelerated her development beyond anything the therapy program expected. Sophia's integration into the company's design process had provided structure and purpose that traditional therapy alone couldn't offer. Her contributions were valued not as accommodations for her condition, but as genuine innovations that improved their products. The recognition had transformed her confidence and communication abilities. The expanded manufacturing facility will be operational next month, Luis said, his attention returning to the industrial landscape that had become his domain. We'll be able to produce 50,000 units annually, with plans to scale to 200,000 if demand continues growing. The expansion represented more than increased production capacity. It was validation that innovation emerging from necessity could compete with products developed in traditional corporate research facilities. The retrofit system's success had proven that genius could thrive, regardless of its origins. Richard Sterling's consulting firm had folded 3 months earlier, his opposition to innovation safety solutions having damaged his reputation among investors who'd watched the company's extraordinary growth. His defeat represented more than personal vindication. It was evidence that fear-based decision-making couldn't compete with innovation that solved real problems. Elena Valdez is visiting next week, Luis said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose past had finally been acknowledged. She's bringing documentation that establishes my contributions to racing safety technology. The patent applications are being amended to include my name as the original inventor. The recognition of Luis's racing innovations had taken months to accomplish, but the legal acknowledgement restored credit that had been stolen decades earlier. More importantly, it provided historical context for his current work, establishing a track record of innovation that spanned 30 years. The racing industry has formally apologized for the systematic exploitation of undocumented workers, Aria added, reading from an official statement that had arrived that morning. They're implementing new policies to ensure that innovators receive credit regardless of their legal status. The policy changes represented broader shifts in how American industries approached immigration and innovation. Luis's success had inspired other undocumented innovators to come forward, revealing a hidden landscape of genius that had been operating in the shadows for decades. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, journalists, documenting the company's community impact, researchers studying their manufacturing processes, and government officials exploring policies that could replicate their success in other industries. Innovation safety solutions had become a case study in how immigration and innovation could reinforce each other. The White House wants to feature our story in the president's economic development speech, Aria said, her voice carrying amazement at the political recognition they'd achieved. Luis, you've gone from facing deportation to being held up as an example of American innovation. Luis smiled at the irony, recognizing that his visibility was both an achievement and a responsibility. The important thing is that other people like me see that it's possible to step out of the shadows. Innovation belongs to everyone, regardless of where they come from. The company's success had attracted imitators, but none had replicated the community-embedded approach that distinguished innovation safety solutions. Their competitors focused on technology, while Luis and Aria had built an ecosystem that included manufacturing, software development, education, and social impact. Mrs. Chen from next door wants to know if you can still look at her car, Miguel said with a grin, his joke highlighting how drastically their circumstances had changed. She says it's making a new noise that sounds like a photocopier. Luis laughed, recognizing that some things remained constant despite their transformation. Tell her I'll take a look this weekend. Success doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. The neighborhood had changed, along with the Reyes family's fortunes. Property values had increased, new businesses had opened, and the manufacturing facility had become a source of pride rather than an industrial intrusion. But the community's character remained intact, anchored by relationships that transcended economic circumstances. As evening approached, Luis walked through the manufacturing facility, stopping to speak with workers who'd become colleagues and friends. The production line operated with the precision of a fine watch, each component assembled with care that reflected pride in meaningful work. The repaired Ferrari sat in the parking lot like a monument to unexpected partnerships. Its engine had been professionally rebuilt, its systems had been upgraded, and its appearance had been restored to showroom condition. But the car's real value remained the memory of a breakdown that had brought two worlds together. "Ready to go home?" Aria asked. Her Tesla pulled up beside the Ferrari. The two vehicles represented different approaches to innovation, known, focused on cutting-edge technology, the other on timeless craftsmanship. But both had their place in a world that needed diverse solutions. "Almost," Luis replied, his attention focused on the retrofitting bay where the latest production units were being tested. "I want to check the quality control results on today's batch." The testing data showed performance that exceeded even Luis's expectations. The retrofit systems were preventing accidents with remarkable consistency, their mechanical elegance translating into real-world effectiveness that saved lives and protected families. Luis's old Honda Civic sat in the employee parking area, its 340 miles now, a badge of honor rather than a symbol of limitation. He'd kept the car despite being able to afford luxury vehicles, recognizing that it represented values that shouldn't be abandoned with changing circumstances. The drive home took him through neighborhoods that had become familiar over 15 years of night shift commutes. But now he saw them with different eyes, not as places where dreams were deferred, but as communities where innovation could emerge and thrive when given the opportunity. The duplex on Maple Street had been expanded and renovated, but its essential character remained unchanged. The small front yard still contained the garden where tomatoes grew alongside roses, where function and beauty coexisted in the space between necessity and hope. Miguel's acceptance letter to Stanford University sat framed on the kitchen table. His full scholarship, a testament to academic achievement that would have been impossible without the stability that innovation's safety solutions had provided. His future stretched ahead like a map of possibilities that extended far beyond his father's wildest dreams. Sophia's therapy journal had evolved into a professional portfolio that documented her contributions to multiple design projects. Her autism spectrum condition was no longer a barrier to overcome, but a perspective that enhanced her ability to solve complex problems. The recognition had transformed her confidence and expanded her ambitions. "What's next?" Miguel asked, as the family gathered for dinner, their evening routine unchanged despite their dramatically different circumstances. "The school bus project enters testing next month," Luis replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose work had found its proper platform. "After that, Sophia wants to develop safety systems for public transportation. She thinks city buses need the same protection as commercial trucks." The conversation continued through dinner, their planning sessions now focused on innovations that could affect millions of people rather than just their immediate needs. But the family's values remained. Constant technology should serve humanity. Success should lift up entire communities, and genius belonged to everyone willing to use it in service of others. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood continued, children playing, families gathering, the ordinary rhythm of a community that had always accepted the Reyes family but could now point to them with pride. The deportation notice that had once threatened to destroy everything had been replaced by recognition that Luis's presence strengthened rather than burdened American society. The retrofit system had saved thousands of lives in its first 6 months of production, but its greater impact was demonstrating that innovation could emerge from any circumstance, that communities could nurture genius, and that America's promise of opportunity was real for those persistent enough to pursue it. Luis opened his notebook and began sketching improvements to Sophia's school bus design, his hands moving with the steady precision of someone who'd learned to find hope in the act of creation. The deportation hearing was 6 months behind them, but the work of innovation continued, driven by the belief that everyone deserved to make it home safely. The scarlet Ferrari had been repaired, using nothing but a hairpin, determination, and the kind of genius that thrived in unexpected places. 6 months later, that same genius was transforming an industry, building a community, and proving that broken things could be made whole through partnerships that transcended every barrier except the unwillingness to try.